Ever wondered how widows survived in the brutal Middle Ages? Could you make it as a woman alone in a world ruled by men? Number 6. Becoming a professional mourner. Did you know some widows made a living by crying? In the harsh reality of medieval times, professional mourning emerged as a legitimate career path for women who had lost their husbands. These women, often dressed in black from head to toe, would attend funerals of people they never knew and wail, sob, and demonstrate elaborate displays of grief, all for payment. Towns and villages throughout Europe maintained an unofficial registry of women who could be called upon to enhance the perceived importance of the deceased through their theatrical mourning. The practice wasn't viewed as deceitful, but rather as a service that honored the dead. A funeral procession with many mourners signified the deceased status and community standing. For widows, this unusual profession provided both a source of income and a social purpose. Many professional mourners developed signature wailing techniques or specialized in particular emotional displays. Some even passed down their mourning techniques through generations, creating family traditions of professional grief. In parts of France and Italy, these women, known as pleuries and préfiches respectively, became so essential to funeral customs that local ordinances regulated their fees. One account from 14th century Florence describes a widow named Allegra who, despite her cheerful name, meaning happy in Italian, became renowned for her ability to shed tears on command and compose impromptu lamentations that could move even the most stoic attendees to genuine grief. The most successful professional mourners maintained networks with local priests and gravediggers who would recommend their services. While the payment wasn't substantial, it offered widows something beyond mere survival, a recognized place in society when they might otherwise have been forgotten. Number 5. Joining a beguinage. How would you like to live in a women-only community with no permanent vows? For many medieval widows, beguinages offered an attractive alternative to both remarriage and the strict confines of a nunnery. These semi-religious communities, which first emerged in the Low Countries during the 12th century, provided widows with unprecedented independence and security. Beguinages functioned as walled mini-cities within larger urban centers, complete with their own churches, infirmaries, and workshops. Women who joined, called beguines, took temporary vows of chastity and obedience while living there, but crucially, they could leave at any time. Unlike nuns, beguines didn't surrender their property to the church, allowing widows to maintain control over their late husband's assets or their dowries. The daily life in a beguinage combined religious devotion with practical industry. Beguines supported themselves through textile production, brewing, teaching, nursing, and manuscript copying. The beguinage in Bruges became famous for its lace making, while those in Ghent specialized in weaving fine linen. These economic activities gave widows financial stability without male supervision, a rarity in medieval society. A remarkable aspect of beguinages was their social diversity. While some communities attracted aristocratic widows, others welcomed women from merchant and artisan backgrounds. This created unusual social mixing that rarely occurred elsewhere in the strictly hierarchical medieval world. The Great Beguinage of Leuven in present-day Belgium housed over 300 women at its peak, operating as a virtual town within a town. In St. Elizabeth Beguinage in Ghent, records show that more than half the residents in the 13th century were widows, many bringing their unmarried daughters with them. Despite occasional suspicion from church authorities about these communities of independent women, beguinages thrived for centuries, providing generational havens where widows could rebuild their lives on their own terms. Number 4. Taking over the family business. Did you realize medieval widows sometimes became powerful business owners overnight? When death claimed a craftsman or merchant, His widow often stepped directly into his professional shoes, a transition that medieval society accepted far more readily than many might expect. This pathway offered perhaps the most direct route to financial security and social recognition for women who suddenly found themselves alone. Guild regulations across Europe commonly included provisions for the widow's privilege, allowing a craftsman's widow to continue his workshop and maintain his guild membership. In London's Weavers' Guild, records from 1389 show at least 17 workshops run by widows who employed journeymen and apprentices just as their husbands had done. Similar patterns appeared in guilds from Paris to Florence, where widows operated as silversmiths, bakers, brewers, and in dozens of other trades. The most successful business widows weren't merely placehold until a son could take over or until they remarried. Many actively expanded their enterprises, leveraged their husbands' connections, and established themselves as formidable entrepreneurs in their own right. Margaretha Horenbout, widowed in late 15th century Ghent, transformed her husband's modest illumination workshop into a thriving business that produced manuscripts for nobility throughout the Low Countries. Brewing proved especially accommodating to widows, with the term alewife becoming synonymous with widowed brewers. In 14th century England, court records suggest women controlled nearly 30% of the brewing industry, with widows forming the largest subset of these female brewers. The widow of William Catesby, after his execution following the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, successfully managed his extensive estates and business interests for decades, securing her family's future despite her husband's fall from political grace. In the commercial centers of Italy and Flanders, merchant widows assumed control of international trading networks. Phoenician widow Pellegrina Morosini continued her husband's silk trade with Constantinople after his death in 1382, eventually expanding into new markets in the Levant. Her business acumen earned her respect among male merchants who willingly continued partnerships with her trading house. While these business widows faced challenges their male counterparts didn't, including restrictions on travel and limitations on legal contracts, in some jurisdictions, their stories reveal how economic necessity created cracks in patriarchal structures, allowing determined women to secure their futures through commercial enterprise. Number 3. Becoming a wise woman or healer. Would you risk being called a witch to earn your daily bread? For countless widows throughout medieval Europe, traditional healing knowledge became their economic lifeline, though practicing such skills increasingly carried dangerous associations as the Middle Ages progressed. Older widows, particularly those who had assisted midwives or learned herbal lore, often transitioned into roles as community healers. Their knowledge of plant remedies, setting bones, and treating common ailments filled crucial gaps in medieval healthcare, especially in rural areas where university-trained physicians were scarce or unaffordable. These wise women typically charged modest fees or accepted payment in goods, providing them with sustainable, if modest, livelihoods. In 12th century, Salerno records mention a widow named Trota, who compiled extensive medical texts drawing on both formal medical traditions and folk remedies. Her writings on women's health circulated widely, though later medical authorities often stripped her name from the manuscripts. Similar figures emerged across Europe, women like Hildegard of Bingen or the lesser-known but widely consulted healers who operated on the fringes of official medicine. Village records from 14th century England frequently reference payments to widows for treating everything from fever to livestock ailments. Court records from the bishop's manor in Watchfield note regular payments to widow Agnes for treating the steward's family with herbal preparations. In German-speaking regions, such women were called Krauterfrau, herb women, while in Scandinavia they held the more respected title of Cloacal, wise women. However, as the medieval period progressed, particularly after the 14th century, the practice became increasingly perilous. The line between healer and alleged witch grew dangerously thin. Widow healers, without family protection or community standing, became vulnerable to accusations, especially when treatments failed or when local politics turned against them. The records of early witch trials in Bavaria and Switzerland reveal a disproportionate number of widowed healers among the accused. Despite these risks, traditional healing remained one of the few professions where widows could maintain independence and earn community respect. Many continued practicing discreetly, passing their knowledge to daughters or granddaughters, creating lineages of healing women that sometimes spanned centuries within the same village or region. Number 2. Taking religious vows. Have you ever imagined living out your days in the peaceful seclusion of abbey walls? For medieval widows facing uncertain futures, convents offered a respectable and secure haven. Unlike unmarried women, or those taking the veil in youth, widows entering religious life brought unique status and often substantial resources that made them particularly valued additions to religious communities. Wealthy widows frequently became benefactresses of established convents or founded new religious houses altogether. Eleanor of Aquitaine, after her tumultuous marriage to Henry II ended with his death, retired to Fontefraud Abbey, which she had generously endowed. There, she lived her final years with considerable autonomy, while technically under religious vows. Similarly, Jeanne de Valois, widow of the Duke of Brittany, founded the convent of the Haspel near Lille after her husband's death in 1399, becoming its first abbess. For widows of more modest means, entering a convent still required a donation, effectively an entrance fee, though this was typically less than a young woman's dowry would have been. Records from the Abbey of Warewell in Hampshire show several widows entering with smaller donations than their younger counterparts, but bringing valuable skills in management, textile work, or manuscript illumination that enhanced the convent's operations. The religious life offered widows distinct advantages: guaranteed sustenance, physical protection, health care in old age, and respectable community standing. For widows with traumatic marriage experiences, convents provided peaceful refuge. The Abbess of Barking's correspondence from the 1380s references several widows who entered explicitly, seeking quiet contemplation after worldly tribulations. Convent life wasn't necessarily as restrictive as modern imaginations might suggest. Widowed nuns, especially those who had brought substantial donations, often received private quarters rather than dormitory accommodation. They frequently maintained contact with their children and grandchildren, with some abbey records showing regular family visits and gift exchanges. Some religious orders specifically catered to widows. The Order of the Widows of St. Alexis, established in 13th century Milan, accepted only women who had been married. Similarly, certain Benedictine houses developed reputations as particularly accommodating to widowed nobility, offering them positions of authority within the community. For literate widows, convents provided intellectual opportunities otherwise unavailable to medieval women. The scriptorium of Chelles Abbey near Paris was largely staffed by widowed noblewomen who preserved classical texts through copying and translation. These women led intellectual centers, ensured that female perspectives and interests survived in medieval literary culture. Number 1. Strategic remarriage. Did you know that some medieval widows married 4 or more times in their lifetime? For women who suddenly found themselves alone in the precarious medieval world, finding another husband often represented the most practical survival strategy, though not always the most desired one. Unlike unmarried girls whose marriages were typically arranged by their fathers, widows exercised surprising agency in selecting subsequent husbands. The Church recognized a widow's right to consent to remarriage, and many seized this rare opportunity for female choice. Court records and wills reveal fascinating patterns of strategic matrimonial decisions that challenge simplistic notions of medieval women as perpetual pawns. For wealthy widows, remarriage negotiations often favored their interests to a degree unimaginable in first marriages. When Catherine Swynford, widowed at around age 25, eventually married John of Gaunt, son of King Edward III. After years as his mistress, their marriage contract preserved her independence and property rights to an extraordinary degree. While this represents an exceptional case involving nobility, similar patterns appeared among merchant and artisan widows who used their inherited resources to secure advantageous terms. Craft widows frequently married journeymen from their late husband's workshop, transforming an employee into a new spouse who could provide labor while the widow retained business ownership and connections. Guild records from 15th century Nuremberg show multiple instances of such arrangements, including the widow of master goldsmith Heinrich Krug, who married his senior apprentice just 6 months after Heinrich's death, maintaining workshop continuity while securing male protection. In medieval London, property records reveal widows of merchants consistently remarrying men younger than themselves, who brought commercial skills but little capital. These age-gap marriages offered complementary resources. The widow provided workshop, tools, and business connections, while the younger husband contributed physical labor and current training. One fascinating example comes from 1382 London, where Marion Chamberlain, the 42-year-old widow of a prosperous baker, married a 29-year-old journeyman, explicitly stating in their marriage contract that she would remain mistress of the bakehouse. For peasant widows, remarriage often occurred with remarkable speed. Manor court rolls from 14th century England show numerous widows remarrying within months of bereavement, particularly those with young children or land-holding responsibilities. Agricultural work required partners, making swift remarriage an economic necessity rather than an emotional choice. The Church viewed remarriage ambivalently, with St. Paul's lukewarm endorsement that it is better to marry than to burn, often cited, regarding widows. This theological ambivalence translated into practical penalties. Remarrying widows were barred from the elaborate marriage blessings given to first-time brides, and local customs in many regions prohibited the festive aspects of weddings for those remarrying. Despite these discouragements, demographic studies suggest approximately 30% of widows remarried in most medieval communities, with rates highest among women widowed before age 40 and among those with significant property or business interests requiring male protection under medieval law. Would you have had what it takes to navigate the perilous path of widowhood in medieval times, or would you have succumbed to the harsh realities that claimed so many lives?